Like, he wanted to lift America out of poverty. This is what his whole Great Society was about. It was really kind of like FDR's New Deal, but it was Johnson's whole new take on it. And a quote says, "This administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America." But Johnson treated poverty as a social problem instead of an economic one. So instead of focusing on creating jobs, he focused more on like job training, like in the Job Corps, and combating illiteracy and all that stuff. Johnson's Great Society Johnson started an extraordinary programs of reforms he referred to as his Great Society. This included goals to reform domestic issues and continuing Kennedy's Civil Rights Bill. The outcome of these goals was to finally lift Americans out of poverty and promote equal rights. Johnson's Great Society expanded a lot of promises from the New Deal, especially in the creation of health care, insurance like Medicaid for the poor and Medicare for the elderly, with the Social Security Amendment of 1965. And this is a picture of him signing the Social Security Amendment, and this is former President Harry S. Truman. And when Lyndon signed the Social Security Amendment, his first Medicare card was to Harry S. Truman. I thought that was cool. And this is the same chart that's in your book in chapter 29. I just copied it. And this is all of the legislation acts of the Great Society and all of what they did. So like Medicaid provided low-cost health insurance for poor Americans of any age who could not afford their own private health insurance. And Medicare provided hospital and low health insurance for most Americans aged 65 and older. We also had the Water Quality Act and the Clean Water Restoration Act, which brought about water and air quality standards and provided funding for environmental research. And it's just a bunch of stuff. Most of this was still going on today, and this was all in the 1960s, and so most people say that he was one of the greatest presidents, but then there was Vietnam and all that good stuff. But this was really good. The 1960s saw people organizing and actively working for change in the social order and in government, including the women's movement. And the women's movement was also known as the feminist movement, and which covered issues such as equal pay, maternity leave, abortion, all that stuff. Y'all probably seen pictures of 1960s of all the protests, the women's rights, and all that stuff. And it also covered, there was movements for gay rights and a push by the courts to expand equal rights in general. But by the end of the 1960s, the anti-war movement seemed to have overshadowed all of the rest of these movements because of, Vietnam and the students' movement trying to get all of their college buddies out of the war, in the war. And if Johnson hadn't been responsible for America escalating the war in Vietnam, he might have been remembered, at least by liberals, as one of America's greatest presidents. Okay, so the Great Society was enormously successful in the early 1960s. Then federal budget dropped, and so did urgency for Lyndon's Great Society programs. Why do you think that is? Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes.
Okay. The Great Society was enormously successful in the early 1960s. Then the federal budget dropped, and so did the urgency for Lyndon's Great Society programs. Why do you think the budget dropped? What was going on in America in the 1960s where we couldn't focus on those Great Society programs anymore? We didn't have the money for them. Why do you think that happened? Nobody knows. How about the war in Vietnam, military, when you funded for military, containment, communism? I'm your friend. Come on, guys. You think yes, containment, communism, Vietnam. This is hard. Sorry, no.